Hi, so glad to be with you here today. My name is Jennifer Rothman, and I'm here on behalf of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. For those of you who don't know, NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans and their families who are affected by mental health conditions. You might be wondering what you're in for today. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with the skills and resources to recognize the warning signs of mental health conditions and know how to respond effectively, whether it's for your own child, a niece, a nephew, a friend of the family, any young person you might come in contact with. It's important that we also give this disclaimer. We, my co-presenter and I, are not psychiatrists or social workers. We're experts in our own experiences with mental health conditions. So understand that we are not asking you to be diagnosticians, only to be expert observers, to recognize the warning signs of mental health conditions, and to reach out when you suspect a student is experiencing symptoms. So let me get a feel for the room today. Raise your hand if you've ever wondered if your child was developing at the same rate as another child. Okay, now raise your hand if you found yourself worrying about a behavior being just a phase or something to really be concerned about. Great. Now, how about you put your hand up if you've ever been overwhelmed by your child's behavior? And how about if you've ever felt frustrated when having to work with teachers at school to maybe address their concerns with your child's behavior? Thank you for participating with me. During our time here today, we're going to address all of your common concerns and frustrations around the behavior of younger loved ones in your life. At the end of the presentation, we do hope that you'll walk away with many resources and tools to keep in your toolbox for when certain situations do arise. It's always important to remember that young people who feel well will do well. When a young person is struggling with a mental health condition, it can affect all aspects of that young person's life, from their ability to complete schoolwork to their relationships with friends and even family. If you're worrying about something or have been having a hard time sleeping, you might not socialize with friends as much because you're drained and you're exhausted. You might have a hard time getting out of bed, making it hard to get to work on time and then taking more sick days than you've planned. Feeling like your best self makes it easier and more natural to actually be your best self day to day. As you can see from this slide, mental health conditions in youth are very common. 1 out of 5 children will experience a mental health condition in a given year, but only 50% are actually going to get the treatment that they need. Many young people won't even be aware that the feelings and behaviors they're experiencing might actually warrant them to get help. You can help to change this by being aware of the warning signs in your child or the young family member or even your child's friends and responding effectively. There can be serious, long-term consequences when we don't intervene when a child or adolescent is showing early signs of mental health issues. These consequences can continue to impact them throughout their life. They can isolate from friends, family, and society, drop out of school, get in trouble with the law, or even die by suicide. When my sister was in high school, we wondered why she was having such a hard time making and keeping friends. She'd spend most of her days in her room. She rarely socialized outside of the home. She just wasn't hanging out with her group of friends like a typical high schooler should. My parents got really concerned when they even noticed that her grades were dropping. She'd always been a straight A student. She even attended excelled classes. Back then, they called it being gifted. Looking back, it's easy to see now that she was struggling and needed help. Like most young people, she thought what she was going through was typical or that there was something wrong with her, which made her feel ashamed and just way too embarrassed to ask for help. This video was created entirely by high school students as part of the Directing Change project in California. Groups of young people are continuing to step forward, wanting to bring more attention to mental health conditions, which gives so many of us hope. So what are we even talking about when we're saying mental health conditions? These are what we mean. On this slide, what you can see are some of the most common conditions you may hear about, but these are just labels. Which conditions are you most familiar with? For this presentation, just know that we are not focusing on labels. We're actually going to concentrate on the challenges mental health conditions create for students, but we wanted to first make sure we were all on the same page. So when we're talking about mental health conditions, these diagnoses are some of what we're referring to. The great news is, with early identification and treatment, recovery is not just possible for young people, but probable. There are several things you can do to help connect your child or their friends or your loved ones to the support that they need. The earlier they get this help, the better the outcome will be. You can help recognize mental health issues early by following these 4 steps. Number 1, know the warning signs. Number 2, reach out and respond. Number 3, work with school staff and your child. And number 4, provide resources and support. We'll be covering each of these steps in more detail throughout the presentation. So let's get started with number 1, knowing your warning signs. Here's a list of some warning signs that you should look out for when observing your child's behavior. With my cousin, we actually found that he would go through severe mood swings where he'd be happy and delightful and active during the morning. He would work on some different projects. He'd get excited about the day's happenings. And, this would happen through the early parts of the afternoon. But just as quickly as that, the great mood would come on, he'd hit a wall, and come dinner time, he'd be up in his room for the rest of the night. He was irritable. It was just not his best moods. And, it was really hard for him to understand how his behavior was affecting the rest of the family. We never knew which Jared we were actually going to get. It always seemed to depend on the time of day. Here's some additional warning signs for you to be familiar with. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities, using alcohol or drugs excessively. With my sister, we found that things started to get worse when her worrying would keep her from going to school or activities that she'd previously been very active in, like playing the piano. She was always great on the piano, something that I tried to do, but it just never worked out. Some of her favorite things to do all of a sudden just became a chore, something that she didn't want to do. She was constantly worried about things that we just couldn't understand, and it kept her in her room or just around the house. It was very hard for her to leave the house. It's important to take all of these warning signs very seriously. If you notice them in your child or your child's friend, or even if your child tells you about their friends and that they're concerned, it's important to reach out and talk to their family members as well. We'll discuss how you can do more of that later in this presentation.